Well, hello, 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 lovely people. Happy New Year to you all. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say Happy New Year on the 20th of January, but I'm going to say it anyway. Hope you had a nice break and welcome back. Welcome to our first webinar of 2022, National Clearing Survey. We are now back in our homes. We're not in the office again, whatever Johnson's saying right now. So we're doing this live from our bedrooms and prospective studies. But we're very keen. I know the team, the sort of data and research and insights and marketing teams have all been working really, really hard to pull together the key insights from the National Clearing Survey 2021, the 7th National Clearing Survey that we've done, which is pretty impressive over 7 years. And we're really keen to go through the key insights, the data that we can all use to improve marketing strategy for our clearing marketing campaigns for this year, and also give you a live demo of how to access the data through Akira Data Labs as well. Please do ask any questions throughout. You can either drop the questions into the chat box, or you can drop them into the Q&A box. I don't really mind, and we will endeavour to get to all those questions as we go through the webinar. We'll have some pause breaks as well. Okay, so just to give you a bit of a breakdown. So yeah, so for the first hour, so from 10 to 11, we're going to be, me and Nat are going to be going through we'll give you a bit of context around where we were back in Clearing 2021, what happened during A-level results day and the sort of subsequent weeks and months that followed, and then that's going to take you through some real detail around what we found from the clearing survey that we ran towards the end of last year, and sort of key insights that we can take away. And then from 11 to 11:30, Nat and Kat are going to take you through how you can access the data and start to use it and manipulate it so that you can use it to learn and improve our marketing campaigns for this year. But firstly, on to introductions. You probably all know me because I've been on webinars constantly for the past 2 years, probably bored of the sound of my voice. But I'm Nick Wilmer. I'm head of education. A lot of what I do is working with data and research teams and sort of wider sector data as a whole, and then better informing our clients' marketing strategy as well. Over to Nat.
Hi, I'm Nat. I'm a senior researcher here at Native, so involved in everything research, from kind of doing proposals, designing the research projects, and analysing the data, and then presenting the findings. Lovely.
And finally, Kat, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Kat. I'm a data analyst here at NetNatives. And for the last few months, I've predominantly been working on pulling together the report you're likely to see later. But I'll pass you back and I will see you all later.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kat. Okay, so we've got quite a lot to go through, so I'm going to kick off. So setting some context then, and rewinding our brains to where we were A-level results day 2021, which feels like years ago. A lot's happened since then. Obviously a new year and everything has changed. But if we go back to that point and where we were sort of going into A-level results day, the one thing was that the teacher assessed grades had been announced early. So there wasn't the major confusion and difficulties and pandemonium that happened in 2020. Students were aware of how they were going to be graded, so therefore were probably better prepared, had a better idea of what they were going to get, and were better researched, understood what was going on going into it. The 18-year-old demographic was on the rise for the very first time. We'd seen that sort of slow descent of sort of available 18-year-olds going into higher education, and that was then, we're now seeing the upturn from that, which meant that there was potentially a lot more 18-year-olds going into clearing as well, which made it quite an exciting time. A lot more opportunity for universities to take sort of larger numbers and larger market share. We'd seen the direct and mature numbers, over the past 2 years in particular, really spike. So a lot more students coming to clearing through direct clearing, and a lot more mature students coming through, a lot more nursing students coming through, and sort of subjects aligned to medicine. Really interesting trends coming through, and there was expectation that would continue. We'd already felt the pinch of Brexit, across, multiple. I think the shelves were empty. People couldn't get across the channel. There was all sorts of stuff going on. But we'd seen the number of students applying from EU that dropped off. We'd seen that sort of through application numbers prior to clearing, so that we sort of knew that was happening. And also, if you remember, lockdown had ended just 2 weeks before A-level results day last time. So, all in all, all the signs were pointing towards a very, very busy clearing. I was expecting lots of students coming through. I was expecting lots of activity happening, lots of applications, lots of movement. And you know what? It did not happen. It was a slightly odd and slightly jarring clearing at A-level results day. In fact, if you look at the numbers, the total applicants placed, that's not clearing, that's all applicants placed. There was a slight decrease year on year from 2020, but that was, taking into consideration the large drop in EU numbers. So actually, the UK and international numbers were up year on year in terms of total applicants placed across the board. If you look at the applicants placed in clearing, there was a 33% decrease, 33% of those that actually got placed during clearing versus 2020. And those direct clearing placed applicants that I just spoke about, there was a 41% decrease versus 2020. So yeah, numbers were down across the board. So what I wanted to do is have a little look at the numbers and work out why that happened and why it wasn't the busy clearing that everyone, or I say everyone, I expected it to be. So the highlights, so some of the sort of key findings, you've got a graph here that shows 2019 to 2021 and those applicants placed in clearing, so from A-level results day all the way through to 28 days after. And you can see for the first 4 days, it kind of follows the trend. It was relatively busy. There was students coming through, places were being offered, it was all happening. But then certainly sort of after day 4, and this is looking at all students, there was almost like a flat line. There were some students coming through, but not the rises that we'd seen previously in 2020 and 2019. And in fact, by the time we got to 28 days after A-level results day, we were down 32.8% year on year. So yeah, so definitely a quieter clearing, and certainly sat in net natives offices. It was quiet. The phones weren't ringing nearly as much, and the phones weren't ringing nearly as much at the clients' at institutions and higher education universities as well. So interesting. There was a near collapse in the EU applicants, like I said, sort of during the clearing window. Obviously, Brexit had a big impact on that, so that was down 56%. There was modest rises and increases in non-EU countries, so sort of the wider international student market hasn't reacted in the same way, and we'll go on to some more detail on that later on. And if you do go into the data, one of the sort of sadder sort of things that you can pull out is that the rate of growth across the different quintiles, the lower participation quintiles definitely didn't grow as much. So there is that widening disparity between the higher participation and lower participation quintiles, which is something that we're definitely going to need to address. I wanted so breaking it up, so looking at traditional school leavers versus those mature applicants. So we can see that same pattern happening with the traditional, definitely a quieter clearing. The mature applicants, again, down year on year. I mean, not as much, and certainly a stronger trend after the 4 days, and certainly a stronger trend after 28 days after. But that's to be expected with mature applicants. They do make, it's either very early on in the cycle or very late, or sort of later in the cycle leading up to start dates that happened, but still down across both those two segments. Looking at the routes into clearing, I think some of the interesting numbers here. So those that were placed in clearing, down 31%. Those placed using adjustment is up 111%. So not massive numbers, but definitely a percentage increase up. The direct clearing students down 38%, which left us with this massive number of free to be placed students we thought were going to go to university and go through clearing, who didn't take up a place. So why did that happen? Here you can see that free to be placed clearing on a sort of year on year graph, and you can see that massive uptick for 2021 there. And on the right hand side, what I've done is breaking it down by age groups across the cycle, and where were those free to place students coming from. There were some in that sort of traditional school leaver, sort of 17, 18-year-old group, but actually if you look at that sort of 20 to 35 plus audience, that large sort of blue curve there, that blue section, is where the large majority of those students sat. So there's a few things happening here. Because the grades were teacher assessed, I'm not going to use the term grade inflation because I don't like it. I think it minimizes what the students actually achieved and did during a very difficult time, but they got grades that were higher than previously in previous years, especially sort of previous 2020. So a lot of students either got the grades they wanted or got better grades than they expected, which had an impact. So students got into their first choice. Students were able to apply through adjustment and go to higher tier universities. So what normally would happen is there would be this sort of tier of students at the top who were who missed out on top tier places, and then would go down to sort of secondary and mid-tier universities and go and try and get into those up. But that was almost taken completely out of the running. Those students weren't really there, so they got into those places. So the places were full, and that took away lots of available clearing places at the top tier and sort of mid-tier universities. Which made the whole thing a lot quieter. There wasn't this huge number of traditional students going through. Also, I think there was certainly, because a lot of places were taken up straight away, some of the clearing places that usually would have been of interest to the older direct clearing and the mature audiences, again, weren't really available. There was certainly an imbalance in terms of what mature students wanted from a local university and the courses they wanted to do, and actually what was on offer. And they chose, for whatever reason, whether it was the course wasn't available because at that time there was other options available. So I mean, I suppose for traditional students there was the option to go into work, take a gap year. For mature students, the choice was not to go to university and to do something else, or do a different type of course that was more vocational or online. So there certainly was a sort of a mismatch between what was going on. Looking at the tariffs, so traditionally you would see lower tariff universities taking up large market share from clearing, higher tariff taking up less. That definitely swapped over in 2020, and we saw that increasing further in 2021. So higher tariff providers saw a 3% increase in market share, lower tariff providers got a 4% decrease in market share. So really squeezing the lower tier universities there, making it tough, and it's certainly something we got fed back to us as well. That massive collapse in EU students, I mean, Brexit happened, it makes complete sense that EU students wouldn't want to come to the UK. Makes me particularly sad and angry, but it is what it is. But also we did see that non-EU applicants up by 5% since 2020. So we are seeing growths in certain markets outside the EU. Here we're looking at all the markets. We're looking at sort of long-term growth along the bottom, short-term growth along the left-hand side, and then amalgamating those two to see where there's growth across both those. So the bottom left quadrant there is where all the EU countries are, but the top right quadrant is quite interesting because if you zoom in, you've got the likes of China and India that have traditionally always been huge student recruitment markets. China's still growing. India's growing at a more rapid rate because of changes in policy, which is great. So definitely a massive opportunity there. But we are seeing other markets come out. So the US, Nigeria, UAE, Turkey, certainly all markets that, even though we haven't got massive numbers, are growing quite considerably, both long and short term. So markets to be aware of, and definitely to feed into marketing strategies for the international student recruitment that's happening at HE institutions. Okay, so that's everything from a data point of view. So now we want to turn our attention and look at what were students actually going through on results day this year. So like I said before, they were more prepared, there was less unsurety, but we wanted to find out through our own channels, through our own survey, student pulse, our monthly survey, we were able to actually ask students the question and find out what was happening in the months leading up to and then during clearing as well. Some of the key findings were the things most important to them when it came to choosing the university for prospective students were course offering, entry requirements, and career opportunities. So again, good to think about how we feed that into comms and messaging. Confidence in academic performance was the biggest barrier. So 4 in 10 prospective students were still really concerned around how they were going to perform. And stress around academic performance was negatively impacting well-being of 1 in 2 students. So 50% of students saying that stress was becoming an overriding factor. And we'll go more into how that looked in terms of anxiety levels and stress levels. Over from Jan to October, as you can see, the trend goes up, and as you'd imagine, August is the sort of peak of that high levels of stress. Not massively surprising, given that's when the results came out. But I think the interesting piece in here was that if you actually look at year on year, so 2020 to 2021, and even though things were, in theory, clearer and students were better prepared, we did see an uptick in students thinking that mental health was a barrier to attending universities in 2021. So 33% increase from 2020, which was in theory a more stressful year, to 2021. So definitely something to address, and definitely something that's coming back to us in all our surveys that we do around well-being and sort of mental health and anxiety levels with students. It's something that's increasing more and more. So what can we do as a sector to help prospective and current students deal with that stress and signpost the right kind of support for them? So finally, I just want to finish off with sort of the key findings and recommendations. So as I've just said, supporting students' mental fitness, making sure that you've got the provision to support not just current students, but actually prospective students, and how do we help students through that journey into A-level results and then into clearing is going to be key. Using first-party data, we are going into a world now when data privacy laws are being turned up a lot, and I totally agree with that. I think it's really important that we do have that governance and control over everything, and making sure that data isn't given away. What that does mean from a marketing perspective is that it takes away some of our ability to target. It takes away our ability to capture data and to do remarketing, build remarketing lists, and target certain age groups. So, gaining first-party opted-in quality data is going to be a massive driver for this year. Making sure that, when things do get turned off on Google Chrome and things like that, that you've got, quality data that is segmented in the right way, that you've got nurture flows built in for, because it's going to become a lot more important as we go forward. Concentrating budget on local mature audiences. We'll come on some of the key findings later on, but I think there is a move towards sort of shortening distances. So, focusing on that local audience, both mature and traditional, I would say as well. But certainly there's opportunity to be made there. Making investments in key international markets. We know EU's dropped off the map, but some of those key markets that I mentioned are going to be key. How you position to individually to those markets, but also segments within those markets. And then planning for the year ahead effectively, building brand, so in theory, in this year, this is my prediction for this year, we're going to go into a busier clearing, because as I understand it currently, we're going to go back to some form of examination. It might be a sort of slow drip feed, open book type examination, but what we should start to see grade levels come down a bit, which means we're not going to have the same situation in 2020 and 2021, which means there will be more students who are having to go through clearing. We're going to see more 18-year-olds coming into the market again. So I predict we're going to have a slightly busier clearing. So it's really important to make sure that you're planning from now through to clearing in terms of building brand, capturing first-party data, making sure that you're the one that students are thinking about, whether whether they've made an application to you or they're going to make an application to you during clearing. Having that strong brand and that connection and engagement levels throughout this period is going to be massively key. So making sure that's all planned and based on data, and hopefully the data that we show you today and access to data labs will help you to do that. So it's poll time, everybody. The first poll, what I would like to know is, I've just predicted it's going to be a busier clearing. You don't have to agree with me. Do you think it's going to be a busier clearing than last year? About the same as last year? Slower than last year? Or who knows? So, Tilly, would you mind posting the poll? And then hopefully everyone can see that. Tilly, am I right in thinking that the answers are coming through and people are responding to it? Excellent. Yes. Okay, fine. I will leave it for a little bit. This is always the interesting time. Just give it 10 more seconds to get our answers in. I'll have a sip of tea while I wait. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's close the poll and look at the answers. What are your predictions? Aha. Okay, you agree with me, mostly. So busier than last year, 54% of you said that. A lot of people voting. Thank you very much. Same as last year, 21%. No one thinks it's going to be quieter apart from 3 people. And then who knows, a solid 23% as well. So we all think it's going to be a slightly busier clearing this year, which is interesting. And certainly I would align with that as well. Okay, great. So Tilly, is that shared? That's shared with everyone. Everyone can see that. Great, thank you. Let's move on. I'm now going to hand over to Nat, who is going to take us through the key findings for 2021.
Thanks, Nick. So just to start with what's new this year, so Nick mentioned this earlier on, but we really want to democratise access to the National Clearing Survey data. So for the first time, we're giving kind of instant and free access to the NCS through a dashboard. We're going to demo that in the second half of the session, so we'll talk a lot more about that then. There are various parts that are available if you partner with us and not available if you don't, so there are benefits to partnering, but as I said, we'll go through that later on, but just to give you a flavour of what's new this year. Next slide, please, Nick.
Sorry, yeah, let's pay attention. Yeah.
So just to give an overview of the kind of demographics and who's making up the survey this year. So we had over 2,500 responses to the survey. We had 43 institutions partnering with us, and the survey is representing students from 113 institutions. So lots of institutions represented in the survey to some extent. 3 in 20 of our partners were from Russell groups, and 3 in 5 were post 92. So just to give you a flavour there of kind of who's making up the demographic of the survey. So many of you will be familiar with National Clearing Survey personas. Every year we kind of test these to see if they still stand the test of time and to see if any new ones emerge. This year we're sticking with the same 4. So we've got our traditional clearing students. So these are kind of the typically students who have not secured a place at their original choices, or they've got lower than expected grades. We have our direct applicants who typically are older than the other groups, and they haven't gone through the original UCAS cycle, so they've applied directly for the first time through clearing. We have our mind changers, so at some point during that cycle, they've changed their mind about either their institution, the course, or the location that they're going to study, and therefore come through clearing to kind of elicit that change. And then the adjustment students, so those who have got higher grades than they expected and therefore are able to upgrade and change their choices. So we'll talk about these all the way through the presentation and through the dashboards and through the report. So just so that you're aware of who those 4 profiles are. And just take a look at kind of how our sample has changed over the last kind of 5 or so years that we've been running the National Clearing Survey since 2015, and here we can just see the change there in the demographics. So this year we've got fewer traditional clearing students making up our sample, more direct students, and then fairly similar in terms, well, more direct students than traditional, sorry, but fairly similar to last year. And our sample are fairly similar for mind changes and a slight increase in adjustment students. So just to show you how the sample has changed for the National Clearing Survey over the last few years. So we've pulled together some kind of key findings for each of the profiles here. Obviously, there's a wealth of data collected for each of these profiles, so we could go on the whole presentation just talking about the kind of different aspects for them. But just to kind of pull out some highlights. So the traditional clearing student makes up 32% of our sample. And we can see that for them, cost of living, entry requirements, and mental health are common barriers. And if we move on to the next slide, we'll also be able to see that teacher and school is an influence for these groups, and half of this group are doing no research ahead of results day, which is interesting, and I guess makes kind of sense in the sense that they don't necessarily know that they're going to get lower grades than expected. So that's what we see for the traditional clearing student. If we move on to the direct applicant, so this is making up 34% of our sample. We can see they're older than the other profile as expected. And for them, we see cost of tuition there as a barrier alongside cost of living and mental health. And if we move on to the next slide, we can see here. So for them, a different influence comes out. So university staff are more influential for the direct applicant, and 65% of these this profile are doing no research at all ahead of results day. Moving on to the mind changer. So these make up 23% of our sample. And we can see, again, barriers for them are fairly similar. So cost of living, entry requirement, mental health. We can see the subjects they're most likely to study. We see humanities in there, so more likely than some of the other groups to be studying that. And if we move on to the other slide, we can see a similar pattern to the other profiles. So 53% of these are doing no research. And we can see here that parents and guardians, friends and university staff are top influencers for this group. And finally, the adjustment students, so they make up a smaller part of our sample, so 6% of the sample. They are likely, again, to see cost of living and mental health there as barriers, but also confidence emerges for this group. And again, similar influences, so parents and guardians, friends and teacher school, and then 49% doing no research. So there's lots of different things to look at in these groups and lots of kind of nuanced differences, but those are just some of the things that we've picked out there. So as Nick mentioned, we know that the international audience, so the non-EU students, has grown, and that the number of unplaced mature students has increased. So what we really wanted to do is kind of spotlight on these two audiences. Now, obviously, there's a huge amount of difference between different markets. So we're not saying that all international students are the same at all. We just wanted to look and kind of see, okay, compared to domestic students, what are those who are international students telling us that's different to domestic students? So 19% of our sample in the survey were international, and 39% of those were direct clearing applicants. We see their top motivations follow a similar pattern to the other profiles, so subject, career prospects and course content are the top, but then we also see that course ranking is more important to this group than it is for domestic students. Cost of tuition, distance to travel and COVID-19 are bigger barriers, not surprisingly. Business studies and economics are more likely to be studied. Teachers and school college are more influential than they are for domestic students. And their research begins earlier, so starting from June and July, although they follow a similar timeline once they're looking to secure a place. For social media platforms, these are similar to the kind of domestic students, so Instagram, YouTube and Snapchat, but we do see that there's a lower daily use for Instagram and Snapchat, and YouTube has a higher daily use. So some nuanced differences there in their kind of social media use. But as we said, you know, there will be such a difference between markets that it's really important to be delving into those different markets and having a look at really what works for different markets. Moving on to mature clearing students. So 24% of our sample are mature students, 60% of which are direct applicants, so more likely to be a direct applicant as expected. Cost of tuition is a bigger barrier for this group, and they're more likely to be influenced by university staff. Interestingly, their research and decision-making behaviour, and Nick mentioned this earlier on as well, either begins very early, so before 2021, or is actually more drawn out and continuing for up to 2 weeks after results day. So there's quite a lengthened timeline there for mature students. And their top used social media platforms are slightly different, so Instagram, YouTube and Facebook. What again is important here is to remember there's a huge variance in mature students, because some mature students will be 21 and a mature student, and others will be 40, 50, and kind of much more mature. And so thinking about how those nuanced differences come out is also important. But just to give a flavour of kind of how different those groups are compared to traditional age or domestic students.
Okay, it is poll time again, people. So we've just run through a number of different ways of splitting up the data in the segments. So we've got the traditional school leaver audience, we've got the direct to clearing, we've got the adjustment, we've got the mind changer. But also I'm quite interested in knowing sort of the language that the sector is using and what the biggest challenge is going to be for you guys going forward. So we've also included mature audiences and local audiences as well. So if we can ask the poll, please. Yeah, which of these target audience segments are going to present the biggest challenges to you as a marketer in clearing 2022? So is it traditional, direct clearing, the mind changer segment, the adjustment segment, the mature audience, or that local audience? Answers on a postcard, please. Sip my tea. Wait. Okay. Interesting to get to know what everyone thinks is going to be the biggest focus area for 2022. Okay. Answers are coming in. Let's give it 5 more seconds. And let's close the poll. And show me the results. Okay, interesting. So we have traditional school leavers are going to be the biggest challenge in clearing 2022, according to the representative sample that we have here, and actually probably is a representative sample based on the numbers. 37% of you said that traditional school leavers are going to be the focus area, the biggest challenge. After that, it's mind changers. So it's capturing those that change their mind last minute for varying different reasons. And I would agree with that. I think that's a tough segment to go after, because you can't really pinpoint who they're going to be at any which stage. There's information from our segments that you can think about targeting them separately, but I know, staying in touch with the mind changer, if they are going to change their mind because of a work commitment, or because if they if something happens personally they need to do, or they just decide to change course or go closer or further away from home, whatever the reason is, it's all about being that brand that they associate with, so they can go. Adjustment after that, 18%, which is interesting. So again, after last year with that rise in adjustment students, if we do see that sort of those numbers again, then how do you tap into that market? Then after that, we've got direct to clearing, mature and local. Okay, that wasn't what I expected everyone to say, but there you go. I've learned something today. Traditional school leavers is the focus, and after that we've got adjustment students. So interesting. Thank you very much. That's shared with everyone. I hope you got the answer to that. Let's move on then to the key findings now.
Thanks, Nick. So yeah, we're going to present 3 key findings to you and just talk a bit around the data for each of those. So we'll start with the first one. So our first key finding is that clearing is increasingly becoming an active choice for students. So I think this is really, this is the case no matter what the reason for going through clearing. So regardless of which profile they are, we see that 1 in 2 students will contact their original institution in clearing, which is down from 2 to 3 who would have done in 2018. So really interesting. We see this actually most for traditional students. So that's interesting, as it highlights it's not just about kind of these people are not going back to their original choice, even though they got lower grades and might want to try and still get in there. So that's really interesting that we're seeing that kind of active move away from potentially those original choices from the original cycle. And 1 in 2 students don't go to the first institution that they contact. So obviously that could be for a multitude of reasons. There might be some that don't get into that first institution they contact, but it's also suggesting that, for quite a few students, they're not choosing to go to that first institution they contact, and they're therefore shopping around and looking at kind of what else is available to them. Traditional clearing students are contacting fewer institutions, so down from almost 4 to just over 3, so from 4 to 3 really. Interestingly, so they're contacting fewer institutions, but there are still 3 institutions that they're contacting. And I think with that and the not going to the first institution they contact, it's showing how much opportunity there actually is on results day to really kind of gain these students in your institution. And that if you're the place that's available to them, and that they're aware of you, and that they see your advertising, they see you've got spaces, that's how you're going to win some of these students on actual results day, because they're not going to the first place they contact and they are shopping around. We wanted to delve a bit further into this and find out kind of what are students doing when they're making these choices. So the first data there on the left, this was a free text question. So we asked students, what are the top factors you use when deciding which institution to contact in clearing? And this was free text, they could say anything they wanted. And we themed these and found these were the top themes. So availability of the course there. So 17% said it was whether the course was available. 16% said they decided based on it being close to home. 15% said course content, so actually really looking at the modules of those courses and deciding actually which one fits them better or more fits what they're looking for. And then rankings, both of the institution as a whole or of the institution for their particular course. For some people, they were just using one of these factors, and that was the only thing they were interested in. And for some, they were using a combination or indeed all of these, and using a very methodical approach to narrowing down their institutions. So some told us they really went through that step by step. So first of all, where are the courses available? Secondly, where are those institutions that are closer to home? Thirdly, let me compare the course content, and then where do those universities rank? And so that's really interesting that some of them are using very methodical ways to do that. Get stuck on the word.
Yeah.
And then on the right hand side there, we've got the top factors for students when deciding which institution to study with. So these are all ratings out of 10. Across the profiles, we see subject, course content and career prospects are the top three. But now we're also seeing access to face-to-face teaching coming out as an important factor when deciding where to study. And that's not surprising given the last couple of years that we've had, that students are really looking for that access to face-to-face teaching when they're deciding where to study. Also, we're seeing that 42% of students had done some research in 2021, compared to 20% in 2018. So this is a little bit down since last year, but we are seeing that students are doing more research before results day. So really thinking about kind of their options and what's going on. But interestingly, 24% of those in 2021 hadn't heard of their institution before results day. So although there's lots of them doing research, the place they actually go to isn't somewhere they've heard of before results day. So that shows plenty of opportunities still to capture that audience either on results day or really helping to make those students aware of you pre-results day and during clearing. Every year we see that students say they're looking for how the clearing process works and when does clearing open, and it's interesting that year on year we see that that's the information they're looking for when they're doing that research, and so highlights really the importance of having that information on your site earlier than results day so that people can really be educated, find out, and maybe you're the person that that they associate with clearing because they found that information that they're really looking for. So interesting to think about, and especially about raising awareness of yourselves during clearing.
Yeah, I think there's really interesting pieces there. The fact that students aren't going back to the original institution, I would thought that would be an obvious step to get back in touch, and then find another course. If you've spent all that time, you've made your choice, and then you don't get into your first choice, you'd still want to go there, I would have thought. I mean, I know I did, but I'm a very small minority. So there's definitely a piece there around nurture and making sure that just because you've got an application through from a student doesn't necessarily mean that they're that bonded to you. There's a whole piece there around how you build early, brand equity with potential students who are going to go through clearing, who aren't going to get their grade, to make sure that they, by the time they get to A-level results day, they love you and they really want to come. So, building that into capturing the data early on, making sure that you're speaking to that student constantly, making sure you're building, better brand engagement and better brand equity throughout leading up to results day, so they do come back to you and you keep hold of those students, you don't lose them. And then they're making applications to less afterwards, so they are being a bit more picky. So for other, if you're going after other students who are coming into clearing, if you've not built that brand up properly with a wider sector within your target segments earlier on, you're going to miss out there, because they're not going to, if you're third on the list rather than first or second, you're not going to get that phone call. So definitely a piece around getting into market early, making sure that you're building brand in the right way with those students and you're capturing data and speaking to them throughout. Yes, sorry, over to you. I'm going to start making comments now on everything you're saying. I apologize.
Breaks up my voice. So key finding 2, so the radius that clearing students are willing to travel from home is shrinking over the years we've seen. So we've seen a 13% decrease in the distance that they're willing to travel since 2018. And 1 in 3 clearing students are saying that distance to travel is becoming a larger barrier to entry. And that's across the different profiles. That's not an effect of kind of direct students or anything like that. That's across all of the profiles. So distance to travel becoming a larger barrier. Location increased 9% in terms of importance to clearing students from 2018 to 2021 when they're deciding on an institution to study at. And being close to home was the second most important factor when deciding who to contact. We were interested to know if some of this was an effect of COVID. However, this year we saw only a really small percentage of people who said COVID actually affected their clearing this year. I think it was 5% of students said that they went through clearing because of COVID. And of those, a really small percentage said anything to do with staying close to home. So it doesn't appear that this is an effect of, at least a direct effect of COVID. Obviously, it might be an indirect effect. It might be something that's happened kind of without them being aware that it's because of COVID, but certainly they don't put it down to being due to COVID. So something that potentially is here to stay, I guess, is the take-home message there. Okay. So this is actually even wider for WP students. So the average distance there for widening participation students is 44 miles compared to the average distance that all students are willing to travel. And we do see that there's commitment to travel per institution type changes. So people are willing to travel further there for Russell Group University, so 85 miles, sorry. So interesting to think about kind of the type of institution and kind of how wide that radius might be for these clearing students in terms of how to capture the local audience for yourselves.
Yeah, I think that's, again, another really interesting piece that's come out of the clearing survey this year, that shrinking of people not, traveling miles and miles to go to university and people wanting to stay close to home. And again, I'm very aware that, we've got lots and lots of people on the call today, and from lots of different types of institutions as well. So I think this slide sort of demonstrates how that potentially changes across the institutions. But when each of you have got your own specialities, you've got your own target focus areas, and hopefully you know where your target segments are going to come from. And I think it's looking at, breaking down the data from your applications and enrollments from last year and looking at, where were the changes, where were you losing market share, were you gaining market share, looking at your applications versus enrollments, and then the clever piece, if you can look at your applications versus enrollments, overlay that with your advertising data and look at where your impressions and clicks are coming from, you then start to see a really interesting trend in the maps in terms of, okay, you get applications from this place and you're spending money on impressions in this location, but actually you're not getting anything through from it. So either the messaging or the positioning is wrong, or you don't go after that and actually you change strategy to make sure you're highlighting and focusing on areas where you're going to get return from. And I would say definitely moving away from wide sweeping campaigns. You're going after all of the Northwest, you're going after all of East of England. Be specific, go after the regions where you're going to get return from. And start to segment the data up. So we've got widening participation students there. That is a different segment to traditional school leaver students. So they should be in separate boxes. The mature audience should be in a separate box. There should be different messaging and positioning for the products and your institution to those different audiences, and they're going to react in different ways and they're going to engage with you in different ways. So building that into the strategy and using data to lead that is going to be key. To work out this piece and see how close or how far you want to target those students from. Back to you, Kat. Kat? No, sorry. It's Nat and Kat. Yeah.
Confusing. Great, thanks. So the final findings, so we wanted to think about what platforms are students using? I think this is always an important question, always good to be looking at. So 1 in 2 clearing students tell us they use TikTok on a daily basis. So we talked about TikTok last year. We saw a huge increase, and we've seen that increase continuing. I think what's really key to remember is that students are using a variety of channels. So we can see here that there are a lot of channels that they are using on a daily basis. We can see that Instagram remains the highest and Snapchat second popular, but TikTok is even more kind of popular with the traditional age students, not surprisingly. So for young respondents, we see TikTok is the third most platform daily, so it takes over YouTube. In our student pulse research that Nick mentioned earlier on, we actually recently did a survey asking students what content from universities they were looking for on these platforms, because they're looking for different content on different platforms from you as a university. And for TikTok, they're really looking for that more light-hearted content. They're looking for the student-generated content, which gives them a feel for student life, a feel for the campus, or just something they can kind of mindlessly browse through. So not really looking for that really hard-hitting content, more for that light-hearted stuff. And that's really what they're looking for on TikTok, which is really interesting. If we move to the next graph here, we can really see how that has risen. And highlights really the importance of us keeping on top of those platforms that students are using, because things change really quickly over time. Back in 2019, when TikTok was first kind of asked about in the National Clearing Survey, we can see there's only something like 3% there, I think, who who are using it daily, and now we've moved up to 50%, and that's really interesting, I think, to see that change over time, and how that platform has really emerged. And on the other end of that, we see how Facebook has kind of continued to lose its market trend. But what's really important to remember is that we shouldn't be discounted completely at all, because we know it's used frequently by mature audiences. So we know that, you know, some of the traditional younger audiences may not be so active on Facebook, or indeed using Facebook at all. However, we do know that lots of students are. They're just from a different demographic. And so I think it's really important to remember that and think about who we're targeting and what type of content we're using on the different platforms.
Yeah, that's the last one on that. Yeah, the platform conversation is always really interesting, and something that, you know, we always get asked at events and webinars around, you know, what's the new trend, what's coming up. That rise in TikTok has been pretty astronomical over the past couple of years. I remember asking, you know, polls and questions in 2020 around whether or not institutions were using TikTok, and actually the majority weren't testing the waters. I imagine that's changed a lot now, but it's definitely about using the channel in the right way, and thinking about how universities, institutions can come across quite badly on TikTok if they're trying to engage with students with old-fashioned brand awareness activity and stuff like that. It's not used for that. The things that we learned from Think Student Live and from other surveys is that, you know, the things that land well with students through TikTok is use of influencers, you know, using influencers on TikTok that have an impact, that can speak to students in an authentic way, in a way that students want to be spoken to, and make sure you use an influencer that's actually from your university. Don't just use a random one. That doesn't go down particularly well. You know, the thing about 17 or 18-year-olds is they're pretty savvy when it comes to this stuff. They know what an advert is and what isn't, but it's got to connect with people in the right way. I think the whole meta piece, so Facebook, Instagram, yeah, it's still important for mature students. I think for younger audiences, we're losing the ability to target younger audiences now. So, you know, think about how you turn to more contextual targeting rather than relying purely on Instagram to target younger audiences. I think that's quite a dangerous game to play going into sort of stronger privacy laws this year. But, you know, so it's contextual advertising to sort of target people at the right time, but it's also using the other channels. You know, if you are, you know, really relying on Facebook and Instagram to get leads through, then that's, you know, I would suggest moving away from that strategy. We're using Snapchat a lot more now, you know, in terms of direct lead gen for open days. You know, you can target younger audiences, and you can get inquiries through those channels. So they've sort of upped their game from an advertising and marketing platform position, and certainly an interesting time and a more variety of channels that are available, and keep on the horizon for new ones that are coming out, because you never quite know which one's going to take off, but have that, you know, keep that innovation pot of your budget back so that you can be reactive and you can use new channels as they emerge.
Great. Just to summarize the kind of 3 key findings that we talked through there. So we see that clearing is increasingly becoming an active choice for students. So really important to be thinking about that clearing content throughout the year for your institution, and being proactive in your recruitment. Secondly, that radius is shrinking. So really thinking about segmenting audiences by area, with local students being key, and using that relevant specific messaging to really kind of make your institution as a viable choice for them. And then students continuing to use a wide variety of channels, but we know that growth in TikTok. So as Nick just mentioned, relevant content on each of those channels, you know, speaking to the audiences, speaking to kind of what they're looking for from those platforms, and not just creating similar content across those platforms, because different things are going to resonate on different platforms for these students. And I'll hand back over to Nick.
Okay. So just to finish up then, before we go on to questions, there are 2 things I'd like people to do. First thing is, if you are at a higher education institution that takes on clearing students and is going to take on clearing students this year, please sign up to the survey. I know there's a few people on the call who are currently partners. Hello. And there's lots of people on the call who aren't currently partners. The way that National Clearing Survey works and the way we get better and better each year and get more insight out is by more people, more institutions joining. It's dead easy. It's all done for you from Net Natives. We build the survey, we give you your own bespoke survey, and then you send it out to your clearing students. Then we collect all the data and then we amalgamate it. And for the students as well, there's opportunities to win prizes as well. So to help them with their ongoing studies. So there's incentive for you as an institution to participate, but also incentive for students. So please do sign up. We are going to be dropping in the chat link to how you can sign up, and also that will be followed up in comms and emails. So please do, if you've not yet signed up and partnered, I'd really appreciate it. We all would. That'd be great. And then from a further piece in terms of if you do sign up as a partner, then rather than just getting access to the wider data, you get access to a lot more very bespoke data for your institution. So we'll show you in a bit around Akira Data Labs, but you can look at specific segments that you should be targeting, where there's business opportunity and propensity to enroll from the clearing body. You can look at how you're positioning against your competitors and where you're losing and taking market share. You can look at where you should be drawing your battlegrounds. It looks at messaging and content that's worked and not worked, and how you can actually position to those relevant segments, and really gives you proper deep dive insight into you as an institution, what the opportunity is, and help you build that audience as well. So my first ask was sign up for this year if you've not done. My second ask is request to log into Akira Data Labs, because what we're going to show you next is all free for the sector. You don't have to be a partner. Anyone can log in and see it. But you have to be a partner to access just bespoke stuff. But yeah, so we'll drop another link in there to show you how to request access to Akira Data Labs as well. Huge thank you to Nat, huge thank you to Kat. Thank you both very much for all the work you've done on this. I know it's been quite a mammoth effort, so we should be very proud. Massive thank you to all the marketing team, the data and insights and research team, design team, everyone who's been involved in the NCS and also building all that data into Akira Data Labs. I think it's really, really fantastic work. We will do follow-ups with all those links in there again, and instructions. We will do follow-ups with answers to all those Q&As, and we'll do a follow-up with the full NCS report as well. So look forward to all of you reading that and engaging with that and asking us questions. But it's been a fantastic webinar today. Thank you so much engagement. Thank you for all of you for staying on for this long as well. It's quite a chunky one for a starter, but I'm looking forward to speaking to you all throughout the year, and any questions you've got in the meantime, please do let us know. But from us at Net Natives, we'll say a big thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.